And we're back with Forum Daily's weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy.
Once again, a very interesting week. I'm actually dressed as if I'm heading up north to take advantage of this warm weather. And it actually might be a good time to do that because markets are really nervous and they continue to shed their valuation of energy prices. And so right across Canada, we're going to see a pretty substantial decrease in gas prices, at least this week. If we're talking this weekend, I would expect on average gas prices, let's start from the west in Vancouver, probably about a 2 cent decrease, maybe a 3 cent if you're lucky. The rest of BC, interior central BC, look for about a 4 to 5 cent decrease net. That's assuming that retailers pass on the dropping the wholesale prices. I'm looking at a 3 cent decrease for Calgary, for Edmonton, and all places in between and around for Alberta. Prices tend to be very sticky in Saskatchewan. And I see that there's sort of a resistance to drop those prices in Regina and Saskatoon, where gas is still $1.59.9. That's a pretty substantial retail margin. And I would expect that those prices should come down, adjust accordingly, at least 5 to 7 cents a liter. That'll still give gas stations about 12, 13 cents a liter to play with. And we're seeing the same effect, although not as quickly on diesel. For all of Western provinces. Winnipeg as well, seen sticky prices in the 155 to 157 range, 157.9 in places like Winnipeg. They're overdue for about a 4 cent correction. So we should see 152 to 153, hopefully by this time next week. Ontario, which saw prices move up to 165 last week, 162 this week, now moving down towards not just 159.9, but 155.9. And we could see it going down as low as $1.51 or $1.52 by the end of the week. So a net decrease of about 6 cents a liter. And the same applies really for Montreal, which saw prices as high as $1.75, now trending down towards $1.65 to $1.70. So that's not a bad scenario, given that this is summer. Demand is extraordinarily strong. And with cheaper fuel prices, well, that's a stimulus in terms of demand. The question is, will supply meet it? The answer is no. But unfortunately, we have a scenario where, many of the industries out there do not, or at least the markets, don't pay attention to fundamentals. They're more interested in what the U.S. Fed does. The belief that somehow at the end of the year, the oil supply situation and diesel in particular will balance itself. Nothing, of course, could be further from the truth. We are still dealing with a fundamental short in supply. And refineries, as hard as they are working, are not going to be able to make up the difference. So we're at that stage where, we can continue to see these lower than believable prices that are now, on average, about 60 cents a liter less than they were this time last year. That's a stimulus, not just for the economy, but for a lot of consumers. And I think sooner or later, markets are going to wake up and realize that the valuation of these products is not quite where it should be. This time next week, Nima, though, we will be talking about the phenomenon called the second carbon tax, the Clean Fuel Standard, in all of Canada, with the exception of British Columbia, which currently has one. The effect may be muted in terms of any price because as I mentioned before, they're likely to increase the amount of ethanol content. In fact, they've already started to do that, not just in gasoline going from 5 to 15%, but now premium blends of gasoline will also see the same. We also have to be mindful that, that'll mean a bit of a reduction in your mileage, probably about 5, maybe even 6%. So you'll be paying more to do the exact same distance you did be in the past, assuming the price is the same. Now we have to turn, of course, to the maritime Atlantic provinces, in which 2 of the 4 are going to see a rather dramatic increase in prices because the federal government backstop imposed on Nova Scotia and on PEI means that in the case of Nova Scotia, on July 1st, a week Saturday, gas is going to be up 16.5 cents a liter for regular, and of course for diesel, up about 18 cents a liter. In PEI, you get the full brunt of it with a 15% HST. You're looking at 16 and a half cents a liter and about 20 cents a liter for diesel. By the way, correction on Nova Scotia, gasoline is up 15 cents a liter because they currently have a 1.5 cent cap and trade, which will be removed in favor of that. Needless to say, Newfoundland will see its carbon tax go from 11.01 to 14.31. So they too will see about a 3.5-4 cent increase. So not all good news on gasoline prices dropping. This is probably as good as it gets for most of Canada. beginning next week, regardless of what happens on markets, the Canadian government is damn determined to making sure the price of energy rises. That's it for this week, Nima. We'll talk next week.
All right, thanks for that, Dan. Again, that was our weekly energy update with Canadians for Affordable Energy.